Become a leak finder. Check for leaks in and around your home. Common places for leaks in the home are kitchen pipes, below kitchen sinks, shower heads, bathroom faucets, toilet tanks, and laundry rooms. One drip every second adds up to 5 gallons per day.
A message from the Climate Resilient Water Sector in Grenada G-Cruise project. Did you know that a 10-minute shower can take as much as 10 gallons of water? That is equivalent to 2 5-gallon buckets of water per shower. Showering 3 times a day? That is approximately 6 5-gallon buckets of water. Let's do our part to conserve water. Remember, 5-minute shower, not a quarter of an hour.
A message from the Climate Resilient Water Sector in Grenada G-Cruise project, reminding you to practice good water conservation habits. Did you know that toilet leaks can be silent? Be sure to check your toilets for leaks at least once a year. Check the surroundings of the toilet to see if it is wet. Check inside the bowl to see if water is flowing from the tank. One drip every second can add up to.
A special good afternoon to all of the persons present here today, and also a special good afternoon to those of you who are online. I know that this consultation is being carried on several networks, including Ride Along Live, Mikey Live, and other platforms. And so for those of you who are logged on and those of you who would be joining us later, welcome. This evening we are going to be having some very, very interesting discussions. It's the final in a series of consultations on rainwater harvesting. So you are about to have a nice ride, as we say. So sit back, relax. First of all, I'd like to also recognize some of the guests we have here with us this evening. We have Ms. Astrid Regler, and of course she's the deputy head of the GIZ project, G-Cruise project. We have Mr. Brian Bonaparte. He's the project manager for the G-Cruise project. We have the technical officer of the Planning and Development Authority, that's Mr. Houston Elcock. We have Mr. Terrence Smith, and he is the general manager of NAWASA. We have Mr. Todd Labari. He's also an engineer at NAWASA. We also have with us Ms. Natasha Joseph, and she's the Business Support and Development Officer at the Grenada Development Bank. You might be wondering why she's here, so you better listen up. She's going to tell you. She's going to be talking money. She's going to be talking financing. So when we get to her, it's going to be interesting. Of course, the representatives from the media, thank you so much for coming. If you've just joined us, you've just arrived, we want to thank you so much for coming. And we're going to be moving along pretty quickly. We're going to have just about a 10-minute project overview, and that's going to be by G-Cruise. And we're going to ask Mr. Brian Bonaparte. He's the project manager for G-Cruise. He's going to come up here and he's going to give a brief overview about what G-Cruise is all about. And folks, I just want to remind you that this is the final one in the series of consultations. We've been working on the draft regulation to be put in place for rainwater harvesting. It is a partnership between GIZ and the Planning and Development Authority of Grenada. And as we go along, as we continue the consultation, you are going to be learning a lot. You're going to be learning a lot about this regulation actually being passed into law and the type of implications it can have on you, because we're not just looking at projects that are going to be starting, but it may have implications for projects that are already completed in terms of installing facilities for rainwater harvesting. So we want you to pay attention. We want you to listen up. Those of you who are online, I know a lot of you in the diaspora are considering coming to Grenada and starting projects and so forth in the not too distant future. Some of you already have applications inside. Some of you are considering it. So please pay attention, and if there is anyone you know who have interest in developing projects in Grenada, you might want to call them up and say, girl, boy, listen, because this can have an impact on you and your development going forward. We're talking rainwater harvesting in case you have just joined us, okay? We're here with G-Cruise, we're here with GIZ, we're here with the Planning and Development Authority. Big things are happening, it's in the making, and we want to make sure that the population is well informed. All right, so without any further ado, I'm going to ask Mr. Brian Bonaparte, that's the project manager for G-Cruise, to come to the podium.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see our fellow citizens showing interest in this very important topic that will affect every one of us going forward in the future. The G-Cruise project is a quite comprehensive project. It means climate resilience, water sector in Grenada, as you can see. Now, this project have an implementation timeline of 6 years. It is being implemented by the government of Grenada, the Grenada Development Bank, the National Water Sewage Authority, and GIZ, the German Development Corporation. These are the various partners of the project. We have our political counterpart, which is the Ministry of Infrastructure. We have an accredited entity, which is, of course, GIZ. We have executing entities, which are the Ministry of Finance, Grenada Development Bank, and GIZ. The project has a total financial budget of approximately 45 million euros. So it's quite a big project, as you can see. Okay, these are the envisioned impacts of the project. For example, in tourism, we have basically interest shown by hoteliers to implement water conserving devices in the various hotels, as well as rainwater harvesting systems on compound. If the people do not endorse, if the people do not support the change, what we are trying to do, then it could do infrastructure projects, but it comes like a failure. So we have to embrace the change that is happening now, because this is a positive change and it will affect every one of us. So component 2 involves sharing knowledge, right? And that is done through various mediums. They have brochures, we have videos. I'm not sure if anyone saw any of our buses with decals saying conserve water. That's one of the ways we're trying to let persons know that there's a need to conserve water. Grenada is being looked at as a front runner already in various initiatives under this project. So we just hope that you pay attention, and your endorsement and your support in this initiative is quite crucial. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bonaparte. Let's give him a round of applause, man. Wonderful, wonderful. So presenting the meat of the matter now is Mr. Alan Gilbert, and he is actually the Senior Technical Advisor of GIZ. So he's going to be doing the main presentation this evening. So I asked Mr. Gilbert to make his way to the podium.
Thank you very much, Ms. Janice. Good afternoon to everyone. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about rainwater harvesting. 90% of our demand falls on our roofs. So that means if we capture all the rain that falls on our homes, we could meet 90% of our water needs. Obviously, everybody wouldn't have the capability to catch, and I wouldn't want to recommend that, but I'm saying we have enough water falling, let's catch some. The domestic potential we mentioned is about 50%, 51%. It is even greater in hotels. Hotels, 65% of the water usage does not need to be treated for lawns, for laundry, for pools and all that. And there's great saving potential in these accommodation facilities. Rainwater harvesting also has a cost savings to you, the consumers, and to me, a consumer. So rainwater is free. And there's increasing assistance for rainwater harvesting systems and for the installation of same. And my colleague Natasha is going to tell us more about that. So I have a little cost-benefit analysis here. The numbers, I hope, are visible. So a 30 by 20 home, which is about 600 square feet, the investment cost for that, I wouldn't go through how we came up with the numbers, but you got to trust that we have the expertise to do that. So it's about $2,900. And for that home, the average bill is about $40. And so when we do the math, if you invest this amount, $2,290, you can see a payback period of about 4.8 years. I believe that's reasonable. It's not a business investment where you're looking for a return in 5 years or 3 years. So this is reasonable. For a home 40 by 25, that's a 1,000 square foot home. The investment, $2,900. The payback period, 6.1 years. I wouldn't go through all of them. If somebody wants to find the table, we can provide it. But we see as we go to concrete, there's a concrete tank for a 50 by 40 business place who want to do rainwater harvesting. If you're doing a concrete tank, this is when it could get expensive, especially when you're going to use a pump. So it's going to be about $92,000, and that could see a payback period of about 15 years. Obviously, you can do this same system with plastic tanks, and you can see a payback period in 3.2 years. But this concrete tank has a useful life of 100 years as compared to the plastic tanks, which is much less. So your investment is better, and it is much more resilient, especially in times of a hurricane or adverse weather event. So for large businesses, industries, and so on, we would recommend the concrete tanks, especially those who can afford it. So rainwater harvesting is also a climate change mitigation, preparation, and adaptation strategy. And we believe it can increase availability of water for agriculture, especially after disaster. It has the ability to feed families when potable water systems are out of service, and that happens fairly frequently in some areas, not all. If you have a rainwater harvesting system, like I do at home, it could help to alleviate the burden of not having water when you need it, especially when you need a good shower. And bucket shower, nice you hear? I don't know if you know that, but a nice cold bucket shower is a really good thing. So it also reduces erosion and flooding by reducing water runoff. Again, Todd will help me with some information on that. While rainwater harvesting is all good, there are limitations, and we don't want to give you a false sense of hope that it's all good, but there are a few limitations that we believe could be mitigated. The first is that it requires some installation costs, but there is the return on investment. So it's a matter of finding it up front and then saving at the end or in the long run. It requires some light technical skills to set up, and I would suggest most of us might be able to do it. If you want to do a very, very complex system, you would need a professional. But you can connect your gutter into a tank, and there you have a rainwater harvesting system. So we got what we need in Grenada to be able to do this. There is the issue of if there is little or no rainfall. And we've been seeing the declension in the rainfall data, but so far we've not had any data suggesting that we've gone less than 1,000 millimeters or 39 inches per year. So hoping that it stays like that, we will be able to sustain ourselves with rainwater. Storage capacity. in dry seasons when there is little rainfall and higher demand, the supply can be depleted if that storage is not large enough. That's an issue, and sizing properly is a key issue. We've developed models for sizing rainwater harvesting, and some of those we want to try to make available so that the public can use them to size their tanks appropriately and so on. Improper installation and management can lead to, of course, increase in mosquito population. I have a black tank at home. It's covered nicely. All the conduits leading to it is all sealed. And I open and visit, check it every now and again. Recently I checked and I saw a few little mosquitoes swimming around in there. How did they get in here? So mosquitoes are resilient too, and they're very innovative. So I don't know how they got in. But what I did is I looked at the seal between the cover, and I put a piece of cloth around it and squeeze it down. And going to keep inspecting it. I think that helped to reduce the number. And we could look at that. And I said to myself, I have to talk to the suppliers to see if we can get tanks now with a better seal, a gasket at the top, to ensure that we don't have mosquitoes getting in. But that's a challenge, and we really don't want to be bringing rainwater harvesting and increasing malaria, so we need to work on that aspect. Systems require periodic maintenance, like cleaning and flushing. We're going to talk about that later as we deal with the regulations. And those are the limitations which, like I said, they can be mitigated. So what do we recommend? We recommend that rainwater harvesting be made mandatory in all new private buildings, as well as institutional buildings, residential complexes. We could say the ICI sector, which is industrial, commercial, and institutional, and make it mandatory for facilities that cater for more than a specified number of users. So these we will discuss later as we look at the regulations itself. Now, there are Caribbean countries already with rainwater harvesting regulations. We have Bermuda, we have Barbados, we have Turks and Caicos, U.S. Virgin Islands, St. Thomas. We also have in the United States, and there's a sort of connotation that rainwater harvesting is only for places that are depraved and destitute. But even in the largest consumer in the world, the United States, is practicing rainwater harvesting. You probably wouldn't see the writing down at the bottom, but all of the states in green, light green, dark green, they all have some form of regulations or for rainwater harvesting. So that's a good number of states in the United States. All right, so it's not just us, and across the world it's being practiced and it's being regulated so that it's done properly. And there's a change we need. With the intervention of the G-Cruise project, and I say the G-Cruise project because not only the G-Cruise project is meant through some of the components that the project manager shared, is meant to increase supply. But by using rainwater harvesting, conservation, and some other things that we're looking at, policy related to efficient devices and the use of efficient water devices, we're hoping that we can reduce the demand by about 7.5% and increase the supply by about 10%. And this should see us, Grenada, being a sustainable water country for the foreseeable future. So I say rainwater is one of the answers. It's a good response, and I trust that we can join us in supporting that initiative to make rainwater harvesting mandatory. Thank you very much.
I think I forgot to introduce myself in the beginning of this thing, so I'm just going to walk back a little bit. My name is Janice Lessie. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer at the Planning and Development Authority. And if you've been hearing the advertisements on the radio and you were wondering who the speakers were, it was myself and the lovely Janelle Ruben, who is the Communications Manager over there at G Cruise and GIZ, okay? So that's that. I noticed that in Mr. Gilbert's presentation, he spoke heavily about the reduction in the demand on NAWASA. And I know that some of you are thinking, those of you in the room and those of you online, you're thinking, well, if there is a reduced demand on NAWASA, how would they meet their financial objectives?
We use the rainwater from this system for every household need you can think about. From washing to cooking, cleaning, bathing, to during the dry season when we have that problem, we use it to cook and to wash and all of our household chores. Sometimes we may use it for drinking, but not all the time. So this is basically what we use the rainwater for.
I use it because of the farming that I do, to wet my vegetables and flowers as well.
For climate change, what is Grenada going to experience? Going to experience water shortage. It's going to experience, particularly after storm hurricanes, the NAWASA system is going to break down, and you will need water in between. Rainwater harvesting could help. So rainwater harvesting is not only about getting water for drinking or for use, it is also about minimizing flooding and flood control.
In case you're wondering, what's the relationship with PDA or the planning department and all of this? Just remember, once the regulation goes through and it goes into law, we're the implementators. We are the ones who are going to make sure that it is executed and so forth. So that is our role in the whole thing. And things will become clearer as we go along, especially in the Q&A session. So without further ado, we now ask Mr. Todd Labary from NAWASA. Please pay attention.
Good afternoon, members of the panel, other members of the implementing team for the G-Cruise project, and all our stakeholders present, and those who are viewing online. Before I get into the presentation, I want to give you a quote from Fortune magazine in May 2000. It says, "Water promises to be to the 21st century what oil was to the 20th, the precious commodity that determines the wealth of nations." So I will be speaking to you today on the impacts of rainwater harvesting. And my viewpoint would consider the interaction of statewide rainwater harvesting and the public utility, water utility, which is NAWASA. So we'll discuss the role of NAWASA as the public water utility for Grenada. Our mission is to provide our customers with safe, adequate, and reliable supply of water, as well as safe disposal of wastewater in a viable manner that meets and exceeds our customers' expectations. When we look at NAWASA's impact, actually, some numbers many people may not know is that NAWASA supplies roughly 97% of Grenada with potable water, 7% of Carriacou, and 95% of Petit Martinique, both of which are desalinated water. And that is also due to the effects of climate change. So we discuss now the challenges in Grenada's water sector. I will discuss the general challenges first, and then the seasonal challenges that we face. One which Mr. Gilbert would have touched in his presentation is limited raw water storage. And that is something that we are working on even through this G-Cruise project. Another one is the limited infrastructure linking water scarce reservoirs to water abundant sources. So what I mean by this is that catchments like the Great River catchment, Granitang area that have an abundance of water, because of the topography and the distance and so forth, it is difficult to convey water from those areas to the eastern corridor, places like Les Avocats and so forth, that have limited supply and are heavily affected in the dry season. One of the activities under the G-Cruise project is the Seven Sisters project, which we would seek to abstract water from the Seven Sisters area and pump over 1910 into St. David's to assist those plants on the eastern corridor. And then also, as Mr. Gilbert would have mentioned as well, the general impacts of climate change on both our groundwater and surface water sources. So our seasonal challenges, and as you can see in the picture depicted here, the adverse effect of reduced rainfall during the dry season. And what we're seeing lately is that this dry season is sometimes extended beyond the typical January to June that we grew up knowing about. And in those times, the supply capacity is exceeded by the demand for water on the existing systems that we have. Another seasonal challenge that we expect in the rainy season, however, is dam blockages due to heavy precipitation events, and these typically lead to the shutdown of our plants temporarily for dam cleaning and so forth. So this is my water proportion diagram. It is from Ohio State University, and as Mr. Gilbert would have mentioned as well, it is culture. There are shifts and variations in it depending on culture, water availability, and so forth for varying regions. And as you can see here, the use for potable water, that is tertiary treatment of water, is way less than those for cleaning, sanitary, and other purposes. And that is where rainwater harvesting can assist. So we discuss a case study here done on the impacts of rainwater harvesting and the effect it has on public utilities. Now, just a disclaimer, NAWASA has not done any in-depth technical analysis as to the exact figures that we would expect in terms of reduction of the demand for rainwater harvesting. And going through this presentation, you would see why that could be difficult in some instances. So a study was performed in the US to analyze the performance of residential rainwater harvesting systems. And this considered 23 cities across 7 climatic regions. The objective, to analyze the contribution of the rainwater harvesting systems to reducing the demand. And another key element of rainwater harvesting is the reduction of stormwater produced from the residential drainage catchment. So the results of this study, just to be brief, highlighted a 20 to 50% reduction in the demand of the households, and that is based on the local hydrometeorological conditions, as well as an average 20% reduction in stormwater. Right, so we discussed the impacts of climate change on our water resources. The 5 Cs in 2020 would have produced the report, The State of the Caribbean Climate, and in this report they would have zoned the Caribbean into 6 zones. Now Grenada falls into Zone 5, which includes the Lesser Antilles and Trinidad and Tobago. So what is expected for Zone 5? So this report was done in 2020, and it is valid for 2020 to 2050. And for Zone 5, we are expected to experience a 12% decrease in our annual rainfall over the next 30 years. And in addition to that, we can expect that the sea surface and air temperatures would rise, which would intensify our drought conditions, right? These impacts would affect both the rainwater harvesting systems as well as NAWASA. Now, based on the size of your system, you may, if you rely on it during the heavy dry season period, there would be a point where you would need some top-up from NAWASA depending on the size of your system and your usage. And that would usher in the next point that I'm looking at to bring, which would be the benefits of your rainwater harvesting system to NAWASA. And the first point, rainwater harvesting promotes investments in localized storage, which increases the customer's capacity during emergency service interruptions. So there is a break in the main, and NAWASA has to shut down to repair it. You have your tank to use for most, if not all, of your water supply needs. And under extreme drought conditions where valve regulations or depleted water reserves may apply, your storage tank now, even if it is empty, can be used to store enough pipe-borne water until the next schedule. Now, under the G-Cruise project, we have several mitigative measures that we're looking at to ensure and limit the extent of these regulations during the drought period. But still, we have that option when you have that storage to fill your tanks for you. In terms of water resources management, rainwater harvesting has the potential to reduce the strain on our aquifers, which promotes the sustainability of our groundwater sources and limits the level of saltwater intrusion that we may experience due to overdrawing or too much pumping of the wells. Now, climate change, another matter, the sea level rise would also affect it, but we can do our part to limit it. Another benefit of rainwater harvesting to NAWASA is that it reduces the demand on the supply network, which in some instances is good for the efficiency of the hydraulic of our network. And this diagram that you see here would show that. So if there is that area on the high point that is marked lower pressure, the supply of water is intermittent because of the supply in the lower area, and they practice rainwater harvesting. The additional water available in the system would be able, in some instances, to reach the system in the high elevated area. Now, this is just conceptual as we're speaking, but in terms of our system hydraulics and the flow and the pressure that is available from the additional supply not used, it could have benefits to our customers as well and reduce the impact, not the impacts, but the strain of additional pumping and other pressure management measures on NAWASA. Right? And finally, another benefit to NAWASA is the potential reduction in production costs. Right? That would include less disinfection, less pumping, and so forth. Now, we don't necessarily have negatives proposed from NAWASA as it relates to rainwater harvesting, but more so considerations. And one of those major ones for us is that poorly designed and maintained rainwater harvesting systems can have health risks if the non-potable water is directly consumed, even if it is blended with NAWASA's water supply. Right? With blended supply, NAWASA's quality assurance stops at the meter because we can't control the quality of the water that you have in your tank. We would admonish, though, that you pay as much mind to it, though, before you use it. If it is stale, if it is stagnant, if it needs boiling, some of the guidelines Mr. Gilbert would get into. Another critical concern for consideration for NAWASA is preventative maintenance of our non-return valves, which are required to ensure that your water storage from your rainwater harvesting tank is not drained back into our distribution network. And as it goes back to the first point, the quality of that water as well is an issue. The third point we have is that the guidelines proposed must also include for those rainwater non-return valves to be connected to the rainwater harvesting systems if they are linked to NAWASA's service line to your property. And you can see below here in the diagram, a non-return valve. It allows water to go in the direction of the arrow, but restricts it from going in the opposite direction. Other considerations to NAWASA, and that's the one that people find ticklish sometimes, and that is the demand reduction may also result in a non-proportional reduction of revenue. And in addition to that, we would have to consider our internal policies for bill estimation, for variance analysis. We would have to consider these policies to ensure that we account for those systems as well, so we do accurate analysis. And a review of the tariff structure. Now, under G-Cruise component 1.3, which Mr. Bonaparte would have touched on, there is a provision for a climate responsive water tariff. And that entails the price signals depending on the water availability, and also the tariff must include for sufficient resources for investments in a climate resilient water sector. So to conclude, ultimately, NAWASA encourages the use of rainwater harvesting, and this policy that would be discussed as water security is focal to our continued operations. While rainwater harvesting may reduce the demand on the water supply, NAWASA does not see this as an outlet for us to reduce our efforts and investments in the water sector, and we want that to be known. And finally, through our annual capital expenditure projects, as well as the G-Cruise project, which we highlighted earlier on here, UK Save and 5Cs projects, NAWASA continues to invest heavily in increasing our resilience, the security and sustainability of our nation's water resources and our systems for the use of generations to come. I thank you for being a good listening audience.
Thank you. Let's give him a bigger round of applause. Well presented. I know he tried to answer the question about reduction in revenue and that kind of thing. He took in front, but I know when the questions and answers are coming, you guys would want to delve deeper, right? You will have a lot more questions to ask. Right now we have Ms. Natasha Joseph. She's the Business Support and Development Officer at the Grenada Development Bank. This morning, on one of the radio shows, someone asked about, in fact, on GBN as well, they asked about, since it's not going to be, or since it's going to be not only for new construction, and it's also going to encompass buildings and commercial residential structures that are already existing, and because of the cost implication, they wanted to know how would the government or some other entity be able to assist with financing to put those rainwater harvesting systems in place. And so I'm happy to say that Ms. Joseph is here today from the GDB, and she's going to attempt to answer those questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nessie. You kind of putting me on the spot there with some of that. But I'll attempt as best I can to give you a bit of insight into what we're doing at GDB as relates to climate financing. In particular today, I'm going to speak to us about a particular project that we're currently implementing that is called the Revolving Fund for Climate Adaptation in Vulnerable Households and MSMEs. This project is funded by the Green Climate Fund through the Department of Environment in Grenada, in Antigua, and the GDB is providing support to the government of Grenada through the Ministries of Climate Resilience and Finance, who are the local executing entities for this particular project. We're implementing, as I mentioned, the revolving fund program, which is output 4 of this project. I wouldn't get into the others because they're not relevant to today's exercise. What this project seeks to do through the revolving fund is to provide an opportunity for privately owned properties, in this case both residents and businesses, to become more resilient to climate change through concessional financing. All right? So that's the gist of what the fund is looking to do. And so it specifically targets homeowners and businesses whose properties and assets are exposed to climate risk. And while we're talking about rainwater harvesting, I'm going to speak to some of the other interventions that the project supports. All right? So it looks at vulnerability in terms of what we define as whether it's financial vulnerability, climatic, physical, social vulnerability of our population in terms of providing them with the support through microfinancing. And it looks at persons not exclusively, but it prioritized persons who would not readily have access to credit. All right? It doesn't necessarily mean that the rest of the population cannot access this program, but it prioritizes persons who would not readily have access to finance. And so it looks at the threats that these groups face in terms of falling below the poverty line due to a natural disaster, etc. And as I said, it prioritized finances to vulnerable populations, including single-parent households and the persons with special needs. As I said, even if it is a priority area, it does not exclude other potential beneficiaries. And so the project looks at multiple interventions. And of course, at the head of this list here, I have efficient water management, which includes water storage, rainwater harvesting for both homes, businesses, as the case may be. Just to add some other areas in terms of context to what the project supports, we're looking at sustainable building practices and climate smart building technologies. So if you want to have a grass roof or green roof, as the case may be, we would consider the additionality in terms of your financing. We're looking at flood and erosion control. We've had multiple requests after the last heavy rains that we had for persons requiring retaining walls and drains, as the case may be. But if we're storing a lot of the water, then erosion is not a problem, right? But in the interim, we're mitigating against flood and erosion control. Structural adjustments to properties, repairs to properties, repairs to roofs, changing out louvers for windows, things of that nature. Renewable energy systems, solar PVs, and energy efficient solutions. So the program, in terms of the revolving fund, covers all these areas in terms of financing. So when you talk about being able to afford your rainwater harvesting system, this is an option for homeowners to consider in terms of financing. All right? Again, health and vector control. Where's Mr. Gilbert? Your mosquitoes? Yeah? We can do mosquito screening and all those kind of things in your windows and all of that, so that even if they get into the tank, they don't come in and bite you. The terms, as I mentioned, this is real concessional financing. I don't think you would get lower or better conditions than this. Maximum loan of $200,000, unsecured. I heard the wows. Meaning that we do not require a mortgage, all right? We would require some measure of ensuring payment, a salary reduction, a standing order, those sort of stuff, but we're not requiring a mortgage of your property in order for you to be able to afford these interventions. The interest rate is 2% per year, all right? With a term that goes up to 15 years. The term is based on our assessment of your ability to repay, your own circumstances. So each applicant is assessed individually, as the case may be, to determine whether or not you qualify. As I say, the program you must have some form of income and ability to repay. Let me go back. And there must be a guaranteed form of payment, all right? So someone may ask, okay, I'm self-employed. We can still consider you once you can show us your income, whether it's through your bank, your credit union, as the case may be, so that we can get that form of payment. Interest rate, again, as I said, is 2%. For particularly indigent persons, our board has the option to even lower that rate. We also have provisions as well for persons who might be disabled or differently abled, so that there could be a portion that might be a grant for these types of persons. Yeah? So eligibility criteria, or this wall that you see here is one of the projects that we financed That wall was in excess of 60 feet wide. Yeah, and be the owner of the home or business. So that's the first thing. If you don't own the property, and when we say own, we expect that there might be a mortgage on the property, so that is okay. We'd consider that. If you're not the owner of the property, if you're leasing or renting, then we would require that you have permission from your landlord to undertake the repairs that you want to do or the work to be done. Be employed, have a source of income, I mentioned that already. Be willing to make repayments through direct banking, salary deductions, as the case may be. Adhere to the list of options provided. So if we're repairing your roof, we don't expect you to brick the house. Yeah? If we're providing you with rainwater harvesting, we don't expect you to use the money for your driveway. All right? So we want you to adhere to what was approved. We constantly monitor these projects during implementation to ensure that what we approved is what's being done. Regular site visits, yeah? And provide evidence. So in terms of what you need to do to qualify, this is basically what it is. There are documentation requirements that we can provide for persons who are interested in obtaining financing through the facility. You'll get contact information at the end of the slides so you can see. For persons who might be existing customers of GDB, we have the option as well to provide you with financing as part of your existing commitment to the bank, up to a maximum of $10,000 that would not require any additional upstamping or commitment as the case may be. So that's an option there. For businesses, we have the Small Business Development Fund that's particularly looking at small business development, as it says, and providing not just financing to new entrants, but also to existing businesses. The Small Business Development Fund has an interest rate of 1%. That is primarily for businesses, small businesses, with a maximum funding of up to $40,000. And I just want to mention this one in here, which is not related, but might be of interest. We have other financing for renewable energy for persons who might be interested in getting into the IPP market. So there's a wide range of what's available at the GDB in terms of financing. So if you're interested, and my last slide, let's talk. All right, you can reach us at any of the mediums on here. My colleague, Ria, our communications officer, is at the back. You can speak to any one of us, or you can toss your questions during the Q&A. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. I think Ms. Joseph deserves a bigger hand of applause. I actually really thought what she said was engaging, and it's a great opportunity. I hope you guys were paying attention. Again, a pleasant good evening to those of you on social media, those of you online, on Ride Along Live, on GIS. It's good to have you here. We're talking rainwater harvesting, in case you've just joined us.
The ocean dances, the rivers flow, water is everywhere you go. But what does this precious resource mean to you? In honor of World Water Day, held on the 22nd of March annually, the G-Cruise project took its cameras to the streets to find out, what does water mean to you?
For me, water is the foundation of everything. Water means a healthy community, thriving ecosystem, and a bright future for Grenada.
Water is life itself. It is vital for our family's health and well-being. We use it to grow healthy foods, cook nutritious meals, and stay clean.
As a marine biologist, every drop we save helps safeguard our oceans, which is essential for not just our marine life, but the future of our island.
Water fuels my energy on and off the field. That's why I use a reusable bottle, helping to conserve this vital resource.
The G-Cruise project aims to increase climate resilience in the water sector. Let us work hard to ensure we have a water-secure future in Grenada.
What are you waiting for?
Tell us in the comments.